Malcolm Gladwell of The New Yorker is the author behind 5 best-selling books. They explore how ideas are spread, decisions are made, the origins of success, and the advantages of disadvantages. Gladwell's new project jumps off the page and into podcasting. His 10-part series is called Revisionist History. He explores people and events that may deserve a second thought or a second chance. We're pleased to have Malcolm Gladwell back in Studio 57. Welcome.
Thank you.
On a serious note, your thoughts on Orlando?
Oh, wow. You know, I did a piece for The New Yorker back in the fall on school shootings, talking about how contagious they are. And you can't understand one shooting in isolation, that they're part of almost, I hate to use the word, but they're almost like a tradition that develops and grows over time. And I think that we shouldn't think about Orlando in isolation. This is what happens when you've had 20 years of steadily building examples of this kind of behavior. And this shooter, I am quite sure, is feeding off he's probably, I'm gonna bet right now, he was obsessed with Columbine.
In fact, I just was reading your piece in The New Yorker that you wrote, and you talk about the sociologist Ralph Larkin, who argues that Harris and Klebold from Columbine laid down the cultural script for the next generation of shooters. And then in many of the school shootings after that, those shooters referenced the Columbine shooters.
So this guy is combining the scripts that come from Islamic fundamentalism and ISIS with the homegrown scripts about expressing this sort of bizarre fantasy. So we're seeing a kind of weird evolution of this particular pathology.
So if mass shootings are contagious, we clearly have an epidemic. There's been 140 of them already, and it's only June, right? So what's the cure? A lot of Democrats think it's gun control. I don't think you do.
I think that it's a lot more complicated than that. You know, because what's going on now, when you have these subcultures that are, they're feeding off each other, they are referencing material that's, you know, they're watching YouTube videos. In the case I wrote about, the kid was immersing himself in these obscure websites about Columbine and watching videos about how to build bombs and comparing himself to previous shooters. So it's very hard for the rest of society to penetrate that world. I think gun control has a place, but let's not kid ourselves that if we passed the strictest gun control in the world, that we would end this particular kind of behavior.
Let's talk about your podcast series. You're calling it Revisionist History. Why?
Because the idea for the show is that every week for 10 weeks, we pick an event, a person, or one case it's a song, a painting that happened at some point in the past, and I retell the story and say, you know, you may have remembered this, but maybe you didn't. Let's go back and ask the question, did you remember it correctly? Is the truth a little different? And is there something we can learn about that story today?
So what's an example of that?
So one story, the opening episode, which airs on Thursday, is about a painting that was in the 1870s, was the most famous painting in all of England. And it was painted by a woman, one of the first prominent female painters in England. And the story is all about what happens to the painter, this woman, after the painting becomes so famous. And it's really a story about what does it mean to be the first woman to penetrate an all-male world? And it's a story about Hillary Clinton. About it. And that's where I want to lead the listener to.
That's Elizabeth Thompson, the painter. And you also, in that podcast, you talk about the Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Gillard, yes.
The first female, if you look at previous examples of women who become the first head of state in their country, the examples are really a little bit sobering. It's not easy to be the first woman to take that. And so if Hillary wins, I mean, my prediction is she's going to be in for a tough time in a way that I don't think people appreciate at this moment. Because there's a kind of, what happened to Gillard in Australia is very, very interesting. She gets elected, everyone says, wow, we finally elected a woman. And there is this kind of backlash. It unleashes this kind of torrent of suppressed misogyny and abuse. You cannot imagine what she goes through, and I tell the story of...
But is there a torrent of misogyny out there?
it's already there, and I think there's a lot more that you can that will happen once if she gets elected.
And the second episode is about why smart people do dumb things.
Well,
Yes.
it's also about Wilt Chamberlain.
It's about Wilt Chamberlain.
I'm obsessed with this story because,
Yeah.
he's a very tall man who's ostensibly smart and does a lot of dumb things. So please help me out.
I was going to say yes. No, it's about
On and off the basketball court.
it's about the fact that Wilt Chamberlain was one of the greatest players of all time, but he had one weakness. He couldn't shoot free throws.
Right.
And so he experiments, and he figures out that if he shoots them underhanded, he becomes a great free throw shooter. So he does that for a while, and then he goes back to shooting free throws the normal way, even though he knows he's condemning himself to a career of mediocrity from the free throw line. So the question is, having discovered a better way of doing things, why doesn't he stick with it? And that's what that show's about. Why
Because it's
doesn't he
called the
do it?
granny
What's the
shot.
answer?
It's called
What's the
the
answer?
granny shot. I know the granny
I'm
shot.
not going to tell you. You've got to listen to the show. I'm not going to give
I
it
don't
away.
understand why. I mean, Shaq had the same problem.
Oh, they all
Couldn't
do.
shoot
I mean,
free
I
throws.
talk about that. Why don't? So you watch the NBA Finals right now. Tristan Thompson gets fouled, goes to the free throw line, and just misses shot after shot after shot. If you're Tristan Thompson, why wouldn't you try a different way of shooting the basketball if you can't do it the normal way?
Or why wouldn't you spend 24 hours a day trying to correct that issue?
It's a puzzle and I answer the question
Now,
in the.
well,
in
I
Now
the
we
just
have
can't
no
wait for-
choice now but to listen
We
to
can
this podcast.
skip to episode 2.
no, you shouldn't skip. You should listen to them all in order. It's revisionist history.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Malcolm Gladwell. Wonderful to have you here. Excited about the podcast. Charlie and I are thinking of starting a podcast. We're apparently now the only people that don't have a podcast.
you are the
John
last two
Heilman has a
Americans.
podcast.
So,
yeah.
What would be a good title or good subject
what
for
could
it?
we call it?
I did some thought, but this just is framing this picture. This is
How about Beauty and the Beast?
The Rose and His Thorn.
Number one.
How about The Rose and His Thorn? Okay, and back to your podcast.
It's actually not bad.
Yeah, it's actually not bad. Yeah. The Revisionist History podcast debuts tomorrow.